The wind had a way of talking out here low and mean, like it was passing gossip between the canyon walls. By the time I reached the edge of Silver Creek, my hat brim was crusted white with dust. The sun had gone from gold to a copper coin, sinking behind the jagged buttes. I'd been riding since dawn, chasing hope that felt as thin as the air. This fa my name's Wade Callahan. And I came to the little clapboard church at the heart of town to do something I swore I never would. Marry a stranger to keep my father's land. The Rancho Callahan wasn't much. It's just 200 acres of rock and thirsty mesquite. One weather-bitten house, and the bones of cattle that hadn't survived the long, dry summer. But it was mine. It was my father's sweat, my mother's prayers, every hard lesson I'd earned since the day Pa died under a wagon axle when I was 12. I'd promised him with my knees sunk in red dirt beside his grave that I wouldn't let the land go. Not for hunger. Not for debt. Not for the greedy men with shiny boots and colder eyes. Then came Elijah Trent. I'd seen him before, stepping out of his polished black carriage at the bank. Silver hair neat under a Stetson that cost more than my best horse. He had the air of someone who'd never missed a meal or worried about rain. The letter he sent last week was folded crisp and clean. It's like his suits. Payment due, $1.200. No mention of the drought. No room for mercy. Just numbers, and below the sum, scrawled in ink that smelled expensive. Meet me if you want another way out. I went. Pride only goes so far when your herd's dead and your well's gone to mud. Trent had looked at me over his spectacles like a man inspecting a horse he might or might not buy. Then he spoke of a woman named Mara Ellison. A widow. 47, he said, with more land than she could work and no kin left. She needed strong arms. I needed a ledger cleared. You marry her, he'd said simply, and your debt disappears. It should have been a clean business deal. But nothing about the desert stays clean. Now I was here. Outside this tiny church that smelled of cedar and candle wax, hands sweating through my gloves though the air had turned sharp with night. Boy, someone hollered. I turned and found Silas Rourke, leaning on the hitching rail, boots crossed at the ankle. Silas and I ran cattle together back when we both still believed rain would come if we prayed hard enough. Now he hired out to whoever paid? You sure about this? He asked, flicking his cigarette into the dust. His face was all lines and mischief, but his eyes carried quiet worry. No, I said. Then why? I looked past him, out to where the moon was climbing pale and watchful. Because if I don't, Rancho Callahan dies with me. He nodded once, didn't offer advice. That's why I liked Silas. Advice out here was worth less than dry creekbed gold. The church door opened with a squeal. A woman stepped into the frame, her silhouette sharp against the glow. For a second, I only saw the outline. All straight shoulders, hair pulled back so tight it glinted silver. Then she stepped forward. My stomach dropped like I'd missed a stare. Mara Ellison. I'd expected someone brittle, maybe bitter, used up by years of wind and sorrow. But she was something else entirely handsome. Yes, though time had cut lines at her mouth and eyes. Her gaze was clear and unsparing, like water drawn cold from a well. She wore a plain dark dress, but it hung from her like she owned her shape and didn't care who looked. You're late, she said. I swallowed. Had to think on it. And I'm here. For a long breath, she said nothing, just studied me the way you study a horse before deciding if it'll throw you. I don't need charity, she said at last, not offering it. I won't be pitied. Wouldn't dream of it. She stepped closer. We were almost the same height. I could see the faint silver at her temples, the way dust clung to the hem of her dress. Then why? Because this is the only way I keep my father's land, I said simply. And I reckon you know a thing or two about keeping promises to dead men. Something flickered in her eyes, pain maybe, or memory. Then she looked past me into the night. Come inside, she said. Let's get this over with. Inside smelled of pine boards and old paper. Pastor Hale stood waiting by the pulpit, his Bible open, his face caught somewhere between pity and curiosity. No guests, no flowers, only the echo of boots on wood. Evenin', Wade, he said softly. Evenin', Pastor. He looked at Mara, who inclined her head with cool grace. Mara. She nodded once. Let's do it. The ceremony itself was quick, but my chest still tightened when Hale said, husband and wife. The words sounded too big, too final, for two strangers exchanging survival, not vows. When it was done, Mara extended her hand businesslike. I took it. Her palm was calloused like mine. Mrs. Callahan now, I suppose, she said wryly. Guess so, I said, though the name sounded strange on my tongue. Outside, the night smelled of smoke and sage. Elijah Trent leaned against his carriage, smiling like a man who'd just sealed a profitable deal. He handed me a folded document, my debt forgiven, signed and stamped. You've done a smart thing, boy, he said. Then, to Mara, and you've done well too. She didn't answer, just looked past him at the dark stretch of road, already half turned away. Something in me wanted to tell Trent to go to hell, but I bit it down. I needed to live to pay him back in ways that didn't involve bullets. The ride out to Dusthaven Ranch was quiet. Mara kept her eyes forward, the reins easy but firm in her hands. I followed on my gelding, head full of dry thunder. The ranch came into view under a hunter's moon. Low adobe house. Wide corral. A barn with boards patched and repatched. Ghostly shapes of horses shifted in the paddock, heads lifting as we passed. A lantern burned in the kitchen window. You'll take the room above the tack house, Mara said as she dismounted. Simple, but it's yours. Fine by me. She nodded, then paused, almost reluctantly. Breakfast is at sunrise. I cook. If you want something else, you make it yourself. Yes, ma'am. She gave me a sharp look. Don't ma'am me. What should I call you then? Her mouth twitched almost a smile, but not quite. Mara will do. All right, Mara. Something eased just a hair in her stance before she turned and disappeared into the house. That first night, I couldn't sleep. Too many new sounds, the restless shuffle of horses, the groan of timbers under desert wind, and somewhere beyond the paddock, a coyote's cry split the dark. I lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about the strange woman I'd just married, thinking about the deal I'd made, wondering if I'd just traded one kind of dying for another. Just before dawn, a knock rattled the door. Fire. A voice shouted, Barn. I bolted upright, heart slamming. When I hit the yard, the world was orange and screaming. Flames licked skyward from the far end of the barn, sparks whipping wild in the wind. Horses shrieked inside. Mara was already there, barefoot, hair undone and whipping like silver thread. She looked like a ghost conjured by the firelight, but solid as the ground. Get the bay first, she yelled. I didn't think. Just dove in. Smoke clawed my throat raw. Heat seared my arms. I found the stall, fumbled with the latch, shoved the terrified animal out into the yard, then another, and another. Somewhere behind me, Mara was coughing, dragging buckets of water, though we both knew it wouldn't be enough. When the last horse burst free, we staggered out together and collapsed in the dirt. My lungs burned. Her face was streaked with soot. She was laughing, wild and breathless. Not how I planned to start a marriage, she rasped. Same, I coughed, grinning despite myself. For the first time, she didn't look cold, just alive. Just real, and God help me, I wanted to know her. By the time the last sparks died and the desert night swallowed the roar of flame, I could feel every inch of my skin throbbing. Smoke clung to me, hair, clothes, even the taste in my mouth. Mara sat a few feet away in the dirt, dress torn at the hem, eyes shining in the fire's afterglow. She was shaking, but steady, like a tree that had bent under wind. A lantern bobbed toward us from the road. Silas Rourke came loping in, hat askew, face grim. Behind him rode a Wagandock Avery from town, lanky and sleepy-eyed hell. Wade, Silas barked as he swung down. You can't get married one day and set the place on fire. Thai tried to laugh, but ended up hacking smoke. Wouldn't dream. Mara's gaze snapped up at Silas, sharp as a blade. It wasn't an ex-Silas's gree, I know, she said flatly. Someone threw a lantern. I saw tracks in the dark. Now Doc Avery knelt beside her, checking her hands, then mine. You both breathed too much smoke. Drink water. Keep upright. I waved him off, eyes locked on Mara. Elijah? Her mouth tightened, but she didn't answer. The silence was enough. Silas swore low and vicious. He's pushing you off your own dirt. Seems he doesn't like the idea of us holding together, Mara said. US one word. But it landed somewhere deep in me. Doc finished his poking and fussing, muttering about scorched lungs and foolish cowboys. You'll live, he said finally. But easy on the heroics, Callahan. I didn't answer. My eyes were still on Mara. She'd pulled her hair back with shaking fingers, stood black on her cheekbones, but her spine stayed straight. Stronger than anyone had a right to be after fighting fire barefoot in the dark. When Silas and Doc left, Silas throwing me a look that promised trouble for Elijah, if he pushed further, we were alone again. The yard smelled of wet ash. Half the barn was gone. The rest smoldered like a warning. Mara broke the silence first. You didn't have to go in after them all. I shrugged. Wasn't leaving the horses to burn. Her eyes softened almost imperceptibly. Those were Frank's bloodline, she said quietly, naming her dead husband for the first time. He caught the first mare wild, trained her himself. They're all I had left of him. I looked at the broken barn, and then back at her. Then we saved more than horses tonight. Oh, she flinched at me, but didn't correct me. For a long moment, we sat in the cooling dirt. Two strangers bound by smoke and something rawer than gratitude. Finally, she stood, brushing ash from her dress. There's coffee in the house. Coffee sounded like salvation. I followed her inside. Her kitchen was small and plain, but warm, light pooling golden over scrubbed wood. She moved quietly, efficient, but no longer distant. I sank into a chair, feeling more boy than man suddenly. You could have died, she said without turning. You too. She glanced back, one eyebrow raised, a flicker of dry humor under the soot. True enough. She poured coffee, slid a mug across to me, and took the seat opposite. For the first time, I saw the woman past the rumors. Hands rough but graceful, mouth tired but kind when it wanted to be. Her eyes, though they were the thing. Gray-green, watchful, full of storms. You didn't come here to play hero, she said. No. I met her gaze. Came to keep my promise. To your father. Yeah, something in her face shifted respect maybe, or just recognition. And now, you're tied to me. I huffed a laugh. Guess so. She stared at me a long while, then said very softly, You could still walk away. That's gone. You've done more than most men would already. I set the cup down, the clink loud in the quiet. I don't walk. Her lips parted slightly, as if to argue, then closed again. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It just was outside. The nights stretched endless and wild. For the first time since I'd agreed to this marriage, I felt a tiny thread pulling me forward instead of back. Morning came burnt and cold. Mara was already outside, boots crunching over ash. I joined her, and together we walked the damage. The barn could be mended. The horses were shaken but alive. She listed supplies we'd need, voice brisk but calm. Silas said he'll haul fresh boards, I offered. She nodded, eyes on the wreckage. He's a good friend. Seems so. She hesitated then. I didn't expect him to show up last night. Maybe he cares, I said carefully. She gave me a look, sharp but not unkind. Care out here gets you killed. Maybe worth it sometimes. That earned me a faint, almost unwilling smile. We spent the day rebuilding what we could, hauling blackened timber, hammering until our shoulders ached. Sweat streaked soot from her face. Strands of silver hair clung damp to her neck. I found myself watching her, not just working, but living, fierce and unbroken. Once, she caught me looking and didn't look away. My chest did something strange then, something warm and dangerous. By dusk, we'd carved out a plan to rebuild the barn fully next week with Silas's help. We stood leaning on the corral fence, watching the herd settle. Somewhere in the quiet, a fragile peace took root. You ride well, she said suddenly. I blinked. Ma'am, on the black gelding, most men can't keep a seat in a dust storm. You didn't fall? I shrugged, oddly pleased. Pa taught me young. She nodded. Then after a pause, Frank was a hell of a rider, too. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said I'm sorry. She glanced sideways, eyes softer. So am I. And somehow, without meaning to, we were sharing grief under the wide, bruised sky that night. Silas came by again, this time with whiskey and news. He sprawled at the kitchen table like he owned the place. Word in town is Trent's mad as a hornet, he said, pouring 3 glasses. Didn't like his fire plan going bust. Mara's jaw tightened. He won't stop. He might, Silas said darkly, if someone made him. I shook my head. Not picking a fight that'll bring the law down on us. Silas smirked, but didn't argue. Then he looked between me and Mara, something sly in his grin. You two survived your first test. Maybe you'll make a pair yet. Mara shot him a look that could skin a coyote. Get out, Silas. He laughed and left, but not before winking at me. After he'd gone, the house felt oddly quiet. Mara stood by the window, hands wrapped around her glass but not drinking. You should know, she said after a long time. Men like Elijah don't forgive. You tie yourself to me, you tie yourself to trouble. Wasn't trouble my middle name already? I tried to joke. She didn't smile. I mean it, Wade. So do I. Our eyes met in the glassy dark of the window. Something electric and frightening passed between us, possibility, maybe. Or just the first crack of loneliness breaking. She turned away first. Get some rest. But I lay awake for a long time after, listening to the desert. And for once it didn't sound so empty. 2 days later, Doc Avery returned to check her lungs and mine. He was gruff but kind, a man used to losing patience out here, and grateful when he didn't. As he packed his bag, paused in the doorway. You're a stubborn pair, he said, almost smiling. Might just outlast this damned country. Mara snorted softly, but when the door shut, her shoulders eased just a little. We fell into a rhythm after that hard work rebuilding. Small talk that turned to real talk. Silence that grew companionable. She told me about Boston winters and how she'd once skated on frozen ponds. I told her about nights on the trail with my father. Stars so thick, you could scoop them with a hat. One evening, after we'd mended fence till our hands were raw, she brought out an old guitar, strings worn but holding tune. Frank's, she said simply. Then almost shy, you play? A little. She handed it over, and I played soft, clumsy chords. She hummed along at first, then sang low, smoky, beautiful, in a way that broke something loose inside me. When the song ended, silence wrapped us warm. She was looking at me, not cold now, not guarded, just looking. I wanted to kiss her then. God, I wanted to, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I said, You've got a good voice. Her mouth curved, small but real. Haven't used it in years. Well, I said softly. Seems a shame to waste it. She looked down, but not before I saw the color rise in her cheeks. Outside, coyotes yipped, and the night stretched wide and alive. For the first time since PA died, I felt something other than obligation. I felt the beginning of a life.